Over a year ago, Lisa Su walked on stage and dropped a bombshell. They had a Zen 3 prototype operating with 3D stacked Vcache. That brought an entire generation's worth of performance to an existing architecture just like that. This was a huge shot across the bow at Intel for two reasons. So the first reason everyone grasped right away, AMD didn't need Zen 4 to bring out something with similar gaming performance to Alder Lake. They now had new levers they could pull that didn't require 5 nanometer or some new fancy architecture. Literally using the same dies they have now for Zen 3, they can enhance its performance by about 10 to 15%. Now, the second reason it was a huge shot across the bow at Intel was something that took people, I think, a few months to realize, and that's that every generation from now on, there's going to be multiple levers AMD can pull to bring new performance and make their products competitive with Intel when they need to. That goes for Zen 4 in addition to Zen 3. Indeed, since the first reveals of Zen 4 information, a lot of people have immediately been saying, all right, it seems like you have some kind of Raptor Lake competitor, AMD. We'll see how that shakes out. But honestly, where's the Vcache models? When can we get them, and how much better will they be than the non-Vcache models? And up until now, all I've really leaked is that, well, they're coming, and AMD has confirmed this publicly by now as well. And, well, they won't take as long to come out as they did with the Zen 3 variants. That is to say, it's not like it's going to be years after the initial Zen 4 launch for these to come out. I wasn't really able to say exactly when they would come out, except that it probably wouldn't be this year. Well, until now. Today, I've come across a couple sets of information that I've gained both through phone calls with some of my best sources and through literal documentation and benchmarks that give us an early look at how Zen 4 with Vcache will perform relative to Zen 4, relative to Zen 3D, and when you can get your hands on it. And, well, let's not waste any time on this. Let's get into it. All right. Zen 4 with Vcache early leak. Now, most of my leak videos that take this sort of a format with the information open with a couple of disclaimers, and this one is no different. The disclaimers I want to get out right away on this one are that the following information comes from both recent phone calls and some documentation I've received from the same sources that got me legendary information like Bergamo, Zen 4C, and final Zen 4 IPC information. So I bring that up because it has to be stressed that this is early silicon that a lot of my current information is going to come from regarding Zen 4 with Vcache, and that because it's early silicon and because the benchmarks, well, it's only a handful of benchmarks, we can't be sure how widespread the conclusions we'll draw today will apply to all different types of applications, right? I have a set of benchmarks on early silicon. It does not mean this is how it will perform in all scenarios, and it does not mean that it can't get a lot better in the final silicon. But what it does mean, this comes directly from people I personally know at AMD, so at least, while you shouldn't draw every conclusion from this, you can take this information to the bank. And let's start with this. Zen 4's Vcache is produced on TSMC's 7/6 nanometer family nodes, just like the Vcache was for Zen 3. Now, you should notice that Zen 4 is the same amount of L3 cache as Zen 3, and that's not a coincidence in my opinion. This made a second generation of Vcache easier to bring to market quickly. I do not believe it is a coincidence that Zen 4's CCDs are a similar size to Zen 3 and Zen 2's. I believe this could potentially, in the future, allow mixing and matching of, Zen 4 with Zen 3 IO dies and vice versa, and this also makes it easier for them to take a similar Vcache layout without too much hassle and upgrading it to a newer generation and bringing it to market quickly with Zen 4. However, this second generation of Vcache is a second generation. The R75800 X3D practically used a beta generation based on the conversations I've recently had. And while there are still some reports of voltage limitations potentially causing slightly lower clock speeds for the Vcache version of Zen 4 versus the standard version, it's not clear if this is going to remain an issue in the final product. Basically, I hear from people kind of conflicting stuff from week to week, like, oh, it actually seems like I'll have the same clock speeds as standard Zen 4, and they'll go, oh, it might be 100 megahertz lower. We'll just have to see. Don't rule out that it might be clocked a little bit lower, but also don't think it's going to be clocked a ton lower. You're not going to be looking at Zen 3 clock speeds with Zen 4 X3D, and that's because Vcache doesn't really have thermal issues. If you go and listen to interviews with Raphael-X, he says it was just kind of an arbitrary voltage limitation of the beta generation of Vcache, and, well, this is a second generation that can take higher voltages, but I'm just not 100% sure yet if that means it'll be able to clock quite as high as the standard Zen 4. But it does have higher performance even at the same clocks, and it also does not have as many voltage limitations. Now, let's get into the most important information. This comes from documentation I have of an internal AMD comparison that was done recently between A0 Zen 4 silicon and final Zen 3 silicon. As far as I am aware, that Zen 4 silicon was constrained to the same TDP as Zen 3. And again, it's A0, so it's probably not boosting as high as final Zen 4 silicon will as well. And in this report, in the conclusion, Zen 3 with Vcache performed 10 to 15% better on average than Zen 3 standard. And I think this is worth pointing out because it's pretty similar to what we saw from Zen 3 with Vcache gaming performance increases over Zen 3 standard as well, making me think that this report is not an outlier, even if it is just one performance analysis. The report also concluded, and this is the bombshell, that Zen 4 with Vcache performed 30% better than Zen 4 standard. And so I cannot promise that these results will translate similarly in all applications. No doubt some applications will get a smaller than 30% increase, but the fact is that in these benchmarks that I saw, on average, Zen 3 X3D was performing very close to how it usually does in games. And so I have no reason to believe that this is an outlier. This might not be the average, but I don't think it's far away from the average. I don't think. And again, even if this was underperforming Zen 4 silicon, they used A0 to A0 in some of the comparisons. In A0 to A0, early silicon to early silicon, Zen 4 with Vcache was performing 30% better than standard Zen 4, and that is really exciting. Now, when can you get it? It was always planned to be ready the first half of 2023, but I have been told that it's been pulled up to compete with Raptor Lake as soon as possible. For now, it is still communicated to me by all sources that the Generation 2 of Vcache won't be ready to fully launch this year. And you will likely do some publicity stunt, though, and this is half of this is my gut, but I'm saying it. They're pulling it up as much as possible. I'm basically hearing that we should expect the R9 7950 X3D and R7 7800 X3D to launch by early Q2, if not in Q1. And because of that, well, just like AMD was able to show off a Zen 3 Vcache prototype, I mean, let's be honest, over half a year before it came out, I find it very hard to believe AMD won't do some publicity stunt soon where maybe they don't launch Zen 4 with Vcache right away, but they say, hey, in 3 to 6 months, you'll be able to get this level of performance just to blow people away. And I definitely don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could do some sort of kind of a paper launch early benchmark. Maybe if it's just with 16 core prototypes, but they could send those to like Hardware Unboxed and Gamers Nexus and Linus Tech Tips and go, hey, this isn't the final stuff, but this is 99% the final stuff. Benchmark it early next to Raptor Lake so that people get an idea of what they'll be able to buy in a few months. That is what I believe AMD is going to do, and I think it's going to perform really favorably against the competition. Now, do you want to see any of that documentation that showed these benchmark results? Here's the thing. I've actually been given the okay to share the slides last minute before I started recording this video, but I have decided that at least for now, I'm not going to share any of the documentation unblurred. Now, what you'd see on screen, it is blurred out, but trust me, I've done several filters and manipulations, so I don't think anyone's going to deblur what's on screen here. I've decided I'm not going to show this, but I have abstracted some of the benchmarks and made it a little vague which models were tested and which benchmarks were run so that there's no way this can be tied back to my original source. And I want to go through some of these kind of vagified benchmarks with you today. And I also want to talk about the repercussions of what this means for Intel, for Raptor Lake, and I actually have more leaks. I'm going to leak when the new embargoes for review and the sales for Zen 4 are going to happen. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Huh. Where's Reese? Reese. There you are. What are you doing down there with that thing? Whether you're looking for a cool set of Bluetooth earbuds or a tracking device so you can find your dog more easily, Both of these products can be found on AliExpress. AliExpress is a sponsor of this piece of content. AliExpress is a feather everyone should have in their online shopping cap for finding cool clothing, electronics, do-it-yourself computer parts, and earbuds and tracking devices, and more, which you can find on sale right now during the AliExpress Back to School sale, as well as interesting ultra-efficient versions of Ampere gaming cards that you can't really find on other online shopping marketplaces. Whatever you want, if you find something cool on AliExpress during the Back to School sale, use the offer codes on screen and in the description to save you on your order. Clicking on these links and using the discount codes really helps Moore's Law is Dead, and it helps you save money. Help Moore's Law is Dead by clicking on the links below and checking out AliExpress today, whether you're tracking your dog, listening to music, or getting an odd Ampere graphics card at AliExpress during their back to school sale today. So like I said, I don't think it's safe to show exact benchmarks and tell you the exact tests that were done, but what I have done is taken 4 of the benchmarks and shown relative performance between these processors. Now, there's a Zen 3 sample, a Zen 4 A0 sample, a Zen 3 X3D sample, a Zen 4 X3D A0 sample. Now, immediately, I have to call out the notes near the bottom here that the Zen 4 Silicon is operating at non-final clock speeds, and the samples were limited to the same TDP, which Zen 4 is meant to stretch its legs more with higher TDPs. I point these things out because there's no doubt in my mind some people are going to point out how close Zen 4 is to Zen 3, and especially how close Zen 4 is to Zen 3 X3D. It looks a little bad in some places here, but the fact of the matter is that I decided to show a lot of the worst case scenarios for you today, and overall, the documentation pretty much loosely compares Zen 4 to Zen 3 with Vcache overall, but if you were to raise TDPs, which this will happen in final Ryzen Silicon, I think actually Zen 4 is going to pull quite a bit ahead of the Vcache models of Zen 3, but it won't in all situations, and I don't want to hide that today. But I have a suspicion some AMD haters will focus on this and obsess over the fact that early A0 Silicon was losing to like Zen 3 X3D by like 10% or something. Well, yeah, that's true, but there's plenty of benchmarks out there of Raptor Lake losing to Alder Lake, so I don't think any of us expect that to happen, though, do you? It's A0 Silicon. And second, if you're going to obsess over how close Zen 4 is to Zen 3 and Zen 3 X3D in these benchmarks, again, of A0 Silicon, then I would suggest you're not allowed to ignore that one of my benchmarks shows Zen 4 X3D A0 Silicon beating Zen 3 by almost 50%. So sure, you can look at this and you can go, oh, in worst case scenario, Zen 4 is only like 7% better than Zen 3, and it's weaker than Zen 3 with Vcache in some benchmarks. And you'd say, yeah, that's true of this early silicon. But have you also noticed how much higher performance Zen 4 with Vcache is than standard Zen 3, and it's low boosting silicon? Again, the type of silicon that we've seen Raptor Lake lose to Alder Lake. Yeah. So I think that the biggest takeaways that you can take from this are the takeaways based on apples to apples comparisons. At the end of the day, I would avoid reading too much into comparing Zen 3 and Zen 3D against the A0 Silicon of Zen 4, because at least as of now, I don't have the, per bench per second clock speed information at my disposal, so I can't account for that. But what I can say is, again, when you look at Zen 3 versus Zen 3D in these benchmarks, what we find is a 10 to 15% performance boost, which is in line with the gaming performance we saw with Zen 3D over Zen 3 with the 5800X 3D. All right, well, then we can say this probably isn't an outlier, and the other apples to apples comparison of new info is that Zen 4 with Vcache outperforms standard Zen 4 by 30%, and that is a bigger increase in the same testing than Zen 3 with Vcache brought over Zen 3. And so, again, I know some fanboys will argue and point to different things on that chart and share it without watching the video, but anytime they do, point those things out to them, because those are the true takeaways. But I wanted to give you enough information to make it clear. that this didn't just come from a whisper. This came from a lot, even if I'm not willing to share the documentation, because I just honestly think it'd be way too risky and could easily be tied back to where it came from. And all right, I've told you what the overall performance increase should be for Zen 4 with Vcache over Zen 4. That is to say, it should be a bigger deal than Zen 3 with Vcache over Zen 3. And I want to start talking about what this means for Intel's Raptor Lake. But before I do that, let me update you on the overall launch situation as Zen 4. As I have been tweeting and other people have been tweeting, little things here and there updating that Zen 4 is being pushed back a little bit due to various BIOS issues and new Expo features having a few bugs in them. Let me just recap when you guys can get your hands on all versions of Zen 4 and their motherboards. So, anyways, from what I am told, the Zen 4 review kits were supposed to be shipped out late last week, but I cannot verify yet that anyone has received them. And so at a minimum, I would just say reviewers are expected to start receiving them by the first week of September. I've already warned you guys in recent videos that a bunch of Zen 4 pictures should start leaking this week and last week, and that's happened. I'm now telling you, expect way more pictures to start appearing everywhere in about a week and a half from now, and I would honestly expect some early breaking NDA leaker reviews within 2 weeks. Now, Raphael 4's official reviews that are under NDA, those are targeting September 22nd right now, according to one of my sources. What's interesting is all my sources confirm that the original review embargo of September 13th has been pushed back, but only one of them says it's the 22nd. So let's just leave it at that for now, that it seems like it'll be pushed back at least a week, and that will be a launch with X670 and X670E motherboards for sale on September 27th. And then the B650 motherboards will go on sale October 10th, and again, all of this is tentative. You know, they already pushed back some of their launch dates, even if they weren't official. But just keep in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these things got pushed back a little bit too. But right now, that's what it is. Then expect Zen 4 with Vcache to be ready first half of 2023, likely by April, if not as early just as possible in Q1. Again, I think they're going to show off Zen 4 with Vcache benchmarks this year. I think that they're going to announce production this year, and I think they're going to try to get it out in Q1. And, well, yeah, I think this is a big problem for Intel. You know, right now there's a lot of people hyping up Raptor Lake, and again, I would say people have been hyping up Raptor Lake since I was the first one to leak its core counts and performance increases per core last year. But since then, it's kind of been a back and forth of mostly a conclusion that, well, whether it's Raptor Lake or it's Zen 4, they're going to be close in performance overall. But I think most people then forget how soon Zen 4 with Vcache is coming and how big of a problem it will be for Intel. I think what we're going to see is AMD launch Zen 4 to desktop on AM5 about a month before Raptor Lake really launches in volume. And then, like a week before Raptor Lake launches, that's when AMD drops the budget motherboards with B650, which again, I've already leaked to you guys, should come in at B550 pricing at most, with some of the numbers I've seen suggesting that if manufacturers don't get greedy, and again, that is an if, that they can afford to sell B650 motherboards for less than what B550 motherboards are because they just cost less to make. And that's a problem. AMD's launching their enthusiast tiers a month before Raptor Lake. Then they're launching their budget motherboards probably about a week before Raptor Lake comes out. And then my guess, right when Raptor Lake drops, AMD will do a presentation showing Zen 4 with Vcache and say, yep, yeah, I know, Intel might win some benchmarks by 5% this year, but in 3 months, we're going to have something 20% better than that. So who gives a shit? And I just don't really know what Intel does about AMD on this one. And when I hear reports that Intel is considering raising prices with Raptor Lake, which is something I've long warned you guys from their earnings, they cannot afford to keep low margins anymore. Investors are mad. They need to make their money back. At the end of the day, I would say Intel's going to raise prices per SKU with Raptor Lake only if they have to, because I do not believe AMD has to. I believe, and it's been leaked by other people already, that AMD can afford to charge the same prices per tier of Zen 4 or even lower that they did for Zen 3. That means if the 8-core 5700X was $300, they can make an 8-core 7700X $300 as well, and then leave room for something that's 30% better at gaming potentially to be $450. It just blows Raptor Lake out of the water for less money than their top i7, let alone their i9, and then they just drop, above everything, a V-Cache 16-core probably for $800. Again, it would certainly be within AMD's required margins of like 45% or higher, as what I called the Lisa Su tax about a year ago. They can afford a 45% margin with a $800 V-Cache laden 16-core Zen 4. The margins on Zen 3 were absurd. There's plenty of room for that. And I can assure you, there is going to be plenty of room for further videos discussing Zen 4 and Intel and many other products as well. And that is why you should subscribe to the Moore's Law Z YouTube channel and ring the bell button so you do not miss that upcoming content. And if you have the extra money, please consider supporting us on Patreon as well. Throughout Hot Chips, we have had one of the contributors, Carbon Cry, covering every presentation, putting out slides, having conversations and side discussions. If you support Moore's Law Z on Patreon, you get access to this Discord where you can talk with me, other contributors, and a large and growing fan base as well. And it just helps support the channel too. And there will be a new die shrink coming out later this week as well, where you can submit questions for that if you're a patron. There's so much ad-free exclusive content that patrons get access to, and we really can't do this without the stable income that Patreon allows for me, Dan Gerard, and a growing list of people that are on the Moore's Law Z team. So if you have the extra money, please support us there. But otherwise, just thank you for watching.